Hello, Blazers. Welcome to episode 126 of UAB Green and Told, originally released Monday, June 17th, 2024. Through our podcast, we are given the opportunity to share stories from members of the UAB community. Green and Told is the most listened to podcast on campus. Want to check out past episodes? Visit alumni.uab.edu/green and told on Spotify or the Apple Podcast app. While there, leave a written review so more alums can find us. I'm Greg Berry, a UAB alum and Director of Communications in the Office of Alumni Affairs. Yeah, getting answers is important, but to get there, you have to ask questions first. Many scientists are inquisitive by nature, including today's guest, Dr. Michelle Cardel. For her, she has always questioned things, even as a youngster, watching her family dynamics.
And just at a very young age, I was like, there's inequity here. Why are the guys outside having all the fun and the women are inside just like working their tails off?
Plus, we'll discover how UAB took a chance on her after she has submitted her application in perhaps one of the coolest spots possible.
I applied to graduate school from an internet cafe in Prague, paying per minute for internet access, if that, dates me.
And she'll share how she joined one of the biggest names in nutrition and weight loss, one that just about everyone is familiar with. WeightWatchers.
He was like, Michelle, I'm offering you the chance to lead our clinical research portfolio that's going to directly inform a program that reaches more than 5 million people across the globe.
Dr. Michelle Cardel is a rock star in the world of nutrition science. Her CV is full of recognition after recognition. More than 100 peer-reviewed publications, 120-plus invited scientific presentations, scores of national and international media engagements. The list goes on and on. But those accolades only share part of Michelle's story, one that begins splitting time between going to school in Florida and spending summers in Puerto Rico, where her family was from.
It was a fairly unique experience that I think I honestly did not appreciate the way I should have until I was an adult. I didn't learn English until I went to kindergarten, so Spanish is my first language. And in that sense, I think it was a really wonderful thing, to grow up bilingual, to really grow up immersed in my culture and have such a strong identity and tie to being a Puerto Rican woman. And, the wonderful, supportive, loving family that I was fortunate to grow up with, and tons of aunts and uncles and cousins. And my grandparents lived next door to my great-grandparents.
Wow.
So my great-grandmother was 98 when she died, and I was 25. So I would go back and forth between my grandparents' house and my great-grandparents' house, and always had cousins and all kinds of people around. So it was a lot of fun, and really, I think, helped shape my worldview and my interest in, working with traditionally underserved populations, et cetera.
What were you like specifically as a kid growing up?
I was a total bookworm. I do remember every time we went to Puerto Rico, you could bring like 2 suitcases, and one suitcase would just be full of books that I would borrow from the library. So always really into books. I think always have been pretty similar to how I am now. Very close with my friends and my family. Cared a lot about what was right. And, I've done some research and written some papers on gender inequity. And I remember being like 8 years old and just livid with everyone in my family, because all the men were outside playing dominoes, drinking beer, and all the women were inside cooking or cleaning, and then like bringing them their food. And just at a very young age, I was like, there's inequity here. Why are the guys outside having all the fun and the women are inside just like working their tails off? And that, a lot of my research and interest has been on health inequities and gender inequities in academia. and so I think that part of me has always been there, always that questioning part rather than just accepting the status quo.
Why do you think you were like that as an 8-year-old? Because that's a thought process that, most kids don't really grasp until they're much older.
I honestly don't know. I've always felt like there should be fairness, in the world. And when I saw things that felt like they were unfair since I was young, I've always had a very, strong reaction to them, um and always just questioned what was told to me. So, I grew up Catholic, and when I was 14, I was in my confirmation class, and I asked a lot of questions, and certain things that they were telling us didn't make sense to me. And they ended up kicking me out of my confirmation class because they felt I asked too many questions. And at that point, at least at the church I attended, that was not welcome. Thankfully, I found, a community at an Episcopal church in my town that was much more accepting of my questioning. And I got to do a great medical mission trip with them. That was actually my first mission trip that I saw the love I had for working with patients, and I really wanted to help people. So like everything, you go through tougher things, but then it opens up new and unexpected, beautiful doors that you didn't even know were going to be possible.
With an inquisitive mind that you had, what did you want to do?
I wanted to either be a doctor or an FBI agent or the first woman president.
All right. Before you even made it to Birmingham, you went to Florida State. Was that the goal then too? I mean, maybe
Yes.
president was out of it, but FBI and medical and stuff like that?
At that point, I had ruled out president and I had ruled out FBI agent. And at that point, I had my sights set on being a pediatrician. I really wanted to work with kids. And I did 3 medical mission trips between the time I was 18 and 22. I learned so much about myself during those trips. And one of those things that I learned was it was very hard for me to compartmentalize and to act in a way with a patient that was concurrent with the expectation. So to give you an example, we were in Honduras for a trip, and I was translating for the doctors because the doctors didn't speak Spanish. So I got to be in the room for like all the things. And one of the things I had to do was tell a mom that her 9-month-old baby was dying. And this woman just like collapsed on the floor crying, and I got on the floor. It makes me emotional even now, like all these years later. But I held her, and I just talked with her, and afterwards the doctor that was in the room with me like pulled me aside, and he was like, if you want to be a doctor, like you have to extinguish that part of you. You have to learn to compartmentalize. And my brother's an ER doctor and an incredible physician, and he has that ability. He's a very compassionate, very empathetic person, but has that ability that I didn't have. And I honestly struggled a lot as an undergrad. I didn't get good grades. It was just a really different time. And so by the end of my senior year, I was like, okay, I don't think medical school is the route for me, but I really want to do something related to public health. And so I graduated college and I went and backpacked Europe for a while, and I applied to graduate school from an internet cafe in Prague, paying per minute for internet access, if that, dates me. And I honestly, I was like, okay, I really think that food and nutrition is interesting. I had become a hospice volunteer during college, and I had patients say things to me like, I'm worried I killed myself with a fork. And, I was like 18, 19 when I started as a hospice volunteer. I was never thinking about how my lifestyle choices were going to affect my health or my health span or my quality of life. And so that was kind of the first time I started thinking about nutrition. And so kind of on a whim, I applied to a graduate program in nutrition. And from the first class I took as a master's student, I absolutely fell in love with nutrition. And I realized this was what I was meant to do.
What was it about UAB that drew you there and led you to apply from Prague?
UAB, at the time I applied, was like the second best nutrition department in the country. We had just like this rock star lineup of faculty at UAB, and everyone was doing really interesting work. And I applied, not really knowing anything about research. I had been in the master's program I was in for maybe like 3 months when I applied for UAB to do the PhD. This is funny to me, they almost didn't let me in. The person who ended up being my mentor, Dr. Jose Fernandez, actually voted against me getting into the program. And thankfully, there were some other faculty members who, because remember, I didn't have good grades as an undergraduate, but once I started my master's in nutrition and I found what I loved, I got straight A's. I did really well on, the entrance exam for graduate school. They basically took a chance on me, because I didn't have that stellar academic record from undergrad, but I was showing a lot of promise as a master's student, and they took a chance on me, and I'll be forever grateful. Dr. Tim Nagy was one of the people that took a chance on me and ended up being on my committee over the long term. And once I met Dr. Fernandez, we clicked instantly, and he's actually, him and his husband are actually my daughter's godparents. So he left a profound impact on my life, despite originally not voting for me to get into the program.
That is just incredible of how that played out. But you got the master's, you got the PhD. Ultimately, were you wanting to use that in the public sector? Did you want to teach? What did you want to do?
When I started, I didn't know. It was really interesting. When I got to UAB, everybody there was brilliant. I was in a small cohort. Some of the other students in the same cohort as me were already physicians, and then they were doing a PhD on top of that. And I mean, I was so intimidated. I just thought, oh my gosh, all these people are so smart, and they'd all done research before, and they all knew what they were doing, and they knew what they wanted to do. And I show up with no research experience really whatsoever, no understanding of what I wanted to do. And I think I kind of fumbled around those first 2 years trying to figure out and quote unquote kind of like find myself. But I was with such incredible people. And by that time, Jose had become my mentor, and Jessica Alvarez became one of my very dear friends, continues to be one of my very close friends to this day. And the people at UAB really just made a huge difference in my life and really created the pathway forward for me to be successful.
At what point did you realize, I do belong in this cohort?
Ooh. I honestly don't think I got to that point until I was a postdoc. I think I had really strong imposter syndrome throughout graduate school and through part of my postdoc. And at some, I just kept waiting for everybody to figure out, I'm not as good as they think I am. And maybe I don't have what it takes. And Jose talked to me a lot about that. He told me, he was like, Michelle, as a woman and as a Puerto Rican woman, there's going to be, barriers in place, and you might need to work twice as hard to be seen as half as good. And that really helped push me to really always show up in the best way possible. And I think that has really stuck with me and has, I think there's two ways that people can take something like that. And I chose to take the way as okay, this is a challenge, and I want to show up every day as the best version of myself that I can.
It's interesting that you brought up imposter syndrome. My daughter is going to PT school, and the professors and the program directors have talked about imposter syndrome and said, look, you're going to feel that you don't belong. Was that common when you were getting your master's and PhD?
It wasn't as common as it is now. And I'm so glad that your daughter is having that experience. Again, I was so fortunate because I think Jose was always ahead of the curve with these things. And he was so much more aware than the average person. Dr. David Allison, who is now the dean of the School of Public Health at Indiana University at Bloomington, he also played a very strong mentoring role for me while there. And he was very aware of this. David really took an approach where he went out of his way to identify and develop people from traditionally underrepresented groups in science, both women and, people of color. I felt so supported, and I felt like I was in such a safe place that helped to keep that imposter syndrome in check. Though it was, it was still present, but it wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't paralyzing.
And you've come a long way because you've really established yourself within the field of work, the field of study that you do. I mean, 100 plus peer-reviewed publications, 120 invited scientific presentations. I mean, I can read through your LinkedIn bio over and over again, and it's a long list. At what point of your career did you realize, you know what? I know what I'm doing. I'm happy where I'm at. I'm being successful, and I'm making a difference.
I think it was at that postdoc spot, especially after I became a mom. I had my first child when I was a postdoc. I was working in Dr. Jim Hill's lab at University of Colorado Anschutz. Jim is now the director of the Nutrition Obesity Research Center at UAB. So it's a small world. Everything always ends up leading back to UAB, which I think is great. And during that time, I think Jim really pushed me in a really positive way, and the other faculty members, I had Dr. Susan Johnson and Dr. John Peters as part of my postdoc committee, and they were so encouraging of me. And, if you know Jim, Jim is like this visionary. Jim and I could, we would talk about all these different ideas and, stuff that, I thought was like pretty out of the box. Other people might have like poo-pooed it, and Jim was like, yes, like more of that. Let's do that. Like, let's get on the out of the box thinking train. And as I became, a mom, and I had this daughter, and I think I really just like came into myself, and really saw myself for the strong woman that I was, and that I did have something to contribute, in the scientific realm. And I really started to see myself as a scientist with that confidence, and with all of the support I had from this amazing mentoring team, through the different life stages that I had. It gave me the confidence to try new things. And I think as scientists, when we get out of that prescriptive box and we give ourselves that permission to go into that out of the box thinking, that's when I think the real magic happens.
And you kind of flipped the switch when you went to the University of Florida. You kind of took what Dr. Nagy, Dr. Fernandez, all of those individuals taught you, and you began teaching yourself. And you're still teaching as an adjunct professor, and we'll go into the next phase of your career in a little bit. But what's it been like being able to shape the minds of young adults and those interested in nutrition?
I think that is one of the biggest privileges of my life. Getting to teach, getting to mentor. At University of Florida, I became a faculty member in 2015. My first student was Dr. Alexandra Lee. Alex actually still works with me to this day. She ended up getting her PhD and then went and did a postdoc, and then I recruited her to the role we have now. It was just such a joy, to mentor students, to push them to be the best versions of themselves, to see them grow and change and learn. I had a great role model for what a mentor should look like. Jose did all of those things. And I felt it was so important that because I had such a great experience with a mentor, that I needed to pay that forward because not everybody was as lucky as I was.
And now you're kind of doing something really cool. You're working for WeightWatchers. This is a global company that just about everybody knows, and they've known for years. You started as director of the Global Clinical Research and Nutrition. You are now, over the last year and a half or so, the senior director. Why the change? Why the move to WeightWatchers, and what are you doing?
Yeah. I mean, I asked myself that question when it was first happening, like, what am I doing? Like, this is so different than the path I had thought. By the time I became faculty at University of Florida in the College of Medicine, I was set on like that academic life. I wanted to work with students. I wanted to mentor. I wanted to do, great research and have an impact on the field. And, I thought maybe, I could move up as an associate professor and a full professor. Maybe I can be like a director of a center or something like that one day. And I never considered industry ever. None of my mentors had gone really into industry. And so it just felt like this foreign world. And I had done some consulting for WeightWatchers, and Dr. Gary Foster is the chief science officer there. And he was an academic for 30 years, had been president of the Obesity Society, was very well respected and trusted amongst the community, and all my mentors knew him, loved him, trusted him. And so when he approached me about this position, I don't think I would have taken it seriously if it wasn't Gary. It's just I respected him and his work
Sure.
so much. He's published and these landmark papers that have made such a difference in our field. And so anything coming from him, I was like, okay, let me at least listen. And he said to me one day, he was like, Michelle, I'm offering you the chance to lead our clinical research portfolio that's going to directly inform a program that reaches more than 5 million people across the globe. And once he said that to me, I couldn't not try, that opportunity for impact. All of us go into the work we do because we care, because we want to make a difference, because we want to help people, support them in becoming the healthiest, happiest versions of themselves. And I thought that this was an opportunity I just couldn't refuse. And so I joined WeightWatchers 3 years ago now, and it absolutely was the right decision for me. And I was able to stay on as adjunct faculty at University of Florida. Gary was very understanding. I had a fully funded NIH lab at the time. I had students, people had moved there to work in my lab. And I told him, I said, I need to stay on the faculty because I made a commitment to these people and I need to carry out that commitment and see them through.
Talk a little bit about WeightWatchers and with the Global Clinical Research and Nutrition. Now you're doing science, you're doing that kind of thing, but what are you doing? What is the role?
My role is I head up clinical research and nutrition for the organization. And so we do the traditional things you would think, run lots of randomized controlled trials, these big research studies. So all that part felt very familiar from the get-go. My team also gets to form the nutrition point of view for the whole organization. And that was a new experience, because then in both areas that I work in, you're working with the marketing team, the legal team, the product team, the communications team. It was a whole new world. And so the initial learning curve was quite steep. Those first 6 months I was there, I was like, oh my gosh, there's just so much I don't know. But again, this is where great mentoring pops up again. And, Gary supported me through every piece of this. He knew kind of what I was going through because he himself had transitioned from academia to industry. And struggled with those same things. So, at every step of my career, I've just been so fortunate to have great mentoring and support and people who really take the time to teach you and mentor you, and that makes the biggest difference.
That little 8-year-old inquisitive Puerto Rican American girl, would she have ever fathomed you'd be where you are today?
I think so. I think I don't think that I could have predicted the path that it would have been. But as a young kid, I had a strong sense of self, and when I hit, kind of like my early 20s, that was shaken up a bit. But once I became a mom, and I feel like I really came back to that, and I feel like 8-year-old me would be very proud of where I'm fortunate enough to be right now.
That's Dr. Michelle Cardel. Dr. Cardel received her Master of Science certificate and PhD in clinical nutrition from the School of Health Professions. In 2017, she was given the Outstanding Young Alumni Award by the UAB National Alumni Society. Today, she is the Senior Director of Global Clinical Research and Nutrition for WeightWatchers. And as we've learned, she credits much of her success to her time in Birmingham and has a great idea of what it means to be a blazer.
To me, it means living life with passion and with curiosity and with integrity, and to be someone that cares deeply and wants to make the world a better place.
Be sure to check out past episodes of the UAB Green and Told podcast. Listen in at alumni.uab.edu/greenandtold. Have a story to share or know someone who does? Email greenandtold@uab.edu. Finally, be sure to follow us on social media. Just search UAB Alumni on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks for listening, and until next time, go Blazers.